for example, not using HTTP. If you're using, say, you're trying to copy from FTP, even if you're using FTP, you can use SFTP for encryption, right? So if you really want to do encryption, Gobblin gives that capability. We don't use that at LinkedIn because, again, we use secure HDFS. So, but it's possible, right? That's one of the points of having a converter and being able to convert your byte stream on the fly and have a converter, a decryptor on the other end. Again, we haven't run any performance experiments to see.
So how about as a clock synchronization failure? How do you ensure, you know, when you start replication, we typically, if it's mission critical, it's very important, both source cluster, source data center and destination data center, typically a different kind of time zone, or even within same time zone, you want to make sure the timing is 100% accurate. Sometimes even NTPD fails.
I mean, yeah, we rely on NTP, right? So we're not trying to solve the problem.
If it fails?
I mean, if NTP fails, a lot of other bad things are going to happen, right? Even your file system timestamp are going to get out of sync, right? So a lot of other bad things are going to happen. So it's the network operations responsibility to have NTP working. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Hello everyone, my name is Abhishek and I'm an engineer on the Gobblin team. So I'm going to talk about how to run Gobblin on AWS and henceforth on any cloud going forward. And that would be the first part. And then the second would be a logical extension to it, that running Gobblin as a service, which will add some bells and whistles and ease out some pains of folks who use Gobblin today. So let's see. First, let's quickly look at what's the Goblin's job execution model. There is a job. Gobblin invokes the source, gets and creates some task out of it, and then it runs the task. And if it's successful, it commits it, publishes it, and persists the states. And if there is a lock, it is released. So there is one component of Gobblin, which is driver master, which does the job creation thing, that is invoking the source and creating the work units or the task. So that's what is marked as like 1, 2, 3 is the master or driver. And then the other is the worker that actually executes it, which is the 4 and 5, and the remaining again, master or driver takes care of. Having that context in mind, today, most of our jobs that run on Gobblin in MR mode or standalone in MR, especially like the JVM that launches it, creates the job that's the master driver, and the mappers are more of the workers which execute those individual tasks. So on a similar model, we have the Gobblin on AWS, where we use Helix for most of the job execution coordination. In this model, in this architecture for running on AWS, we have a launcher which talks to AWS, provision resources, and provision resources via ASG. ASG is an auto-scaling group in AWS world. Using which you can specify how many minimum or maximum number of nodes you want, and what's the scaling policy, what you should look for to scale up or down. So for master, we have it fixed of 1 min, 1 max at the moment. And for the workers, it provisions based on your configuration. You specify a min and a max, and it looks for CPU and other kind of hints to scale up and down. We have a network file system, NFS, which will be replaced with EFS going forward, which is shared between all the nodes, and the master or the driver is the one that provisions it. And master does the job of creating tasks for all the jobs it sees and submits it to Helix, and it's distributed between workers to execute that. So with that, let's look at how you can set up your own Gobblin on AWS cluster and get your jobs running. So the config at the moment is not very well segregated in terms of what you set and what you have to set and what you don't. But basically, it's very straightforward. Although it seems tons of config, you have to just specify the cluster name that you want to have and your credentials that you want to run as. And if you want to, okay, can I do a Okay, so you just specify the cluster name and you specify the credentials. If you're running on someone else's behalf, you can ask them to set up a role. How to set up the role would be in the documentation that would come out with the when we roll out this feature in GA. And that's about it. Other things are auxiliary. You can configure it or you can leave it as is and it'll work out of box. So let's see this config and the Gobblin launcher script running in action. So I'm going to simply invoke this script and tail on it and see what happens. So on my EC2 login in ASG section, I have 3 widgets, one of the existing cluster that I'm running. Let's see if there are more ASGs. So there is one more newer ESG that has come up. And in the config also, you specify location to your job conf on the S3. So you have to upload your job conf on the S3. So the job conf that I'm using is the Wikipedia zip. Wikipedia is kind of hello world of Gobblin. So in this job, the Gobblin source that is used is to just extract certain titles of pages from Wikipedia and write to local file system or HDFS, whichever you want to. So we are just making use of that. So this is something, the location to S3 is something I have specified in the config. So let's see what's going on with the ESG. So master ESG has been submitted, and after one master is launched, the subsequent workers ESG is also submitted. Let's see in the instance side what's going on. So I have a bunch of new instances that came up. 3 are initializing. So in my config, I have the number of master as 1 and the minimum number of workers as 2 and maximum as 4. So 2 workers are initializing at the moment. In the configuration, you also specify the zookeeper that the cluster would talk to because Helix needs a zookeeper. So this is a zookeeper we are using, and it has registered itself as a Gobblin Kafka, and it launches an exhibitor as well on the master node, which you can look at and see what's your cluster status like. So at the moment, the master is not completely booted up. When it does, it will show up here. And meanwhile, I can try to log into the master and see what's going on. So it also, when you invoke the launcher script, it actually saves the credentials locally for you to log into any of the nodes that are launched in the cluster. So I'm in the master node right now, and I'll just go into the directory where the work is happening. So it creates a directory with the name of the cluster you specify. Okay, sure. Okay, sorry. So here you see all the directory that's are been used by Gobblin. So cluster conf is all the configurations about cluster, the one I showed you. The job conf is something Gobblin posts S3 every minute or so, which you can configure in the config again and gets and saves the conf. The logs is the logs for all the executions, and the work directory is Gobblin work directory. So let's go into logs and see what's happening. So we have logs for master here and the runners. So we have two workers, the task runners, which already have started. So they are also putting in some logs. So I'll just do a quick tail to see if I think it already picked up the job and executed it. So so if you go through the logs, you see that it registered with Helix, and after that, it would have it pulled from for the config and found one new configuration, which is pull from Wikipedia. And for that new config, it submitted that job and all the tasks to Helix for execution. These are the Gobblin metrics that are being printed. Then that execution happened. More details about each of the tasks that executed would be in the task nodes logs, but this is the final output that we see that went into a directory which we can look at. So this is these are the four things that in standard Wikipedia job that we configured to pull. So those have been pulled in. And just to quickly look at one of the runners logs, it should show if it picked up the task and executed what it did. So this is the work unit it got to execute. That is a task, and all the details about how it executed and the final metrics it had. So in the simple way, you have launched a cluster which you can use, and it would have some kind of HA associated with it, and you can just keep changing your configs by going to the S3 location that you have all your configs. So right, like I have Wikipedia or zip, so you can have another zip file, or you can add more configs and it will pick up and execute those. So this was this was running Gobblin on AWS. Just going back to the presentation. Okay. So right now, like I said, there is only one master, but we are working on getting multi-master where if one master goes down, you still have other masters looking out for you, and that will ensure a true HA. Although today also, if the HA goes, the master goes down, ASG would bring up another node and it will register as a master. And with there will be some rework for some task, and but it will still resume from where it left off. The other next step is to replace NFS with EFS. I heard that Amazon has just made it GA yesterday. I didn't get access to preview to use it with this integration. Then support for spot instances so that you can run cheaply for all the workloads that are not so important and save on cost. Then one of the logical extension that jumps out from DCPNG or anything is support for continuous execution, and this kind of running cluster and the Helix model helps us do that. Then right now we have some basic hooks for auto scaling, and we want to make that more advanced in terms of number of jobs and queues, and we want to exploit Helix as well, because Helix also has callbacks for different things that goes on in the cluster, because it's a cluster management system. Then we will soon be also releasing an army, so that rather than from code, you can directly just boot up an army and launch on AWS. So going forward, so now that we have something running on a way to run Gobblin as a cluster on AWS, this next logical step is to have it as a service, so that you have a nice UI where you can just click a couple of things, a couple of buttons, and It will do all the hard work that you had done in configuring and launch that cluster and then create jobs and execute those jobs. So this is what we do in Gobblin as a service. So this in the previous one, if you would have seen, it does asks AWS about ESGs for master and the workers. For in the service mode, it also requests for the zookeeper that it needs. It also launches zookeeper of the required size that you want, and then it has an UI which has a job factory which creates jobs and uploads to S3 and makes it available to master to create for the task and execute it. So let's have a quick demo of how that works. No. Oh, and I didn't show the exhibitor, which is zookeeper view of what it looked like for the Helix. So you have for the execution, just I showed the leader register itself as a leader, the master registers as a leader, and you can see it in the controller section. And then you can see all the nodes that are part of that cluster and all the jobs that are part of that that are submitted to the cluster for schedule execution. And when the execution is actually happening, you can also see further child nodes, which shows the exact tasks that are getting executed. So moving on to the Gobblin on cluster, Gobblin service, sorry. This is a sneak peek preview. It's still very much work in progress. So these are clusters that I have actually running. So I will go into creating a cluster, but before that, the things that we launch are like the zookeeper, like I talked about, and the exhibitor, so that you can easily browse through it. A log stash, ELK stack. Basically, the logs that come into the directory are moved into, or not moved into, but put into Elasticsearch using Logstash as they come along, and are made available through Kibana so that you can look through it and browse through it or search through it. Then this is the log directory exactly on the instance, which I was showing the logs at. The key which you can use to log into the instances of the cluster and all the nodes that are in that cluster. Then you can look at more details, suspend, terminate, or actually get the key. So I'll just launch a new cluster. I'll first submit a job because, or I'll create a cluster. So let's create a new cluster, and I'm going to call it Kafka cluster 5. You can just select different options, the region, the instance type, and the minimum workers, maximum desired workers, the cluster size for the zookeeper that you want, if you want to enable metrics or not. And then if you are running on someone else's behalf, you can specify their role. You don't need access and secret key. And then you just hit submit. So this will create a cluster, and let's see what all it does while creating the cluster. It first, oops, and I should zoom this. It first submitted a request to AWS to create an ASG for Zookeeper and hence launch instances for it. So that's what we are looking at right now. Zookeeper is kind of essential for us, so it waits for at least one Zookeeper instance to boot up. We can look at what's going on the ASG front. We have a Zookeeper ASG submitted here, and we should see an instance coming up. A new instance is initializing here. We see some movement in the logs. So ASG has Zookeeper instance has come up. It found an instance. So now it's creating all the required configurations for the cluster that it needs. After it is done with that, before launching, because it also sees that if the Zookeeper is responsive enough, it waits for it because again, Zookeeper is essential. So it's continuously checking it every 5 seconds for its availability. Meanwhile, Zookeeper is busy booting up. Let's wait for it. I think it'll take a minute. The cluster configuration itself is bit time taking. We will keep a watch on it. Meanwhile, I will submit a job to an existing cluster so that we can see how it looks like to submit a new job here or create a new job. So let's go to the job. These are the jobs that I have running at the moment in different clusters. So if I have to create a new job, I get a list of source that I need to select from. It's work in progress. We haven't, although Gobblin supports all of these kind of sources, we haven't opened up the wizard for that yet. But let's select the Wikipedia for now. So it will ingest from Wikipedia. Then you specify different options for the Wikipedia for the different kind of sources. The things that are mandatory and you cannot change are made mandatory by default in the UI. The things that you can change around are here. So I just named it meetup job and I left rest of the things as default. Let's continue. So now you can, like, Gobblin has concept of writing to multiple things, which you can specify the number of forks. In the last screen, I forgot to mention that, but I just left it at 1. If I would have selected more, so this kind of wizard for different things would have come up that n number of times. I only have specified 1 fork, so I will select that 1 fork. Which sync I want to write to. So I will select Kafka. This is something very freshly baked, and Shishanka something worked overnight to get it done. So now we can write to Kafka as well. So I'll just select this, and the writer type is destination type is Kafka. It's fixed. You cannot change much there, and I can change the topic. Oops. Meetup. I'll just name it meetup. Job. And this is a Kafka server that I'm running. So it will write to this Kafka server, and that I can show you here. It's this is the Kafka server that we have. Oops, where did I go? Sorry. So I'll submit this job. Yeah, I have to select the cluster on which I have to run it. So I'll select Kafka cluster 4. My Kafka cluster 5 is still coming up. Then if I want to schedule it or not, and the kind of schedule, you can select that, but I will leave it as no because I want to run it instantly. I'll submit it. So now that job has been submitted, should have been submitted. Yeah, I can see that meetup job as something here. And in a short while, we should see that show up consumers the topics. We don't have it here because it would still be picked up by the cluster 4 that I'm running. It's an exhibitor for that. In the configs, the moment it is picked up, it will show up here. I can go into the instance of this, but let's wait for that. Yeah, so it's here. The meetup job is here and it is actually running. So we see all the tasks for it here. There is an exception, I guess. Path must start with a character. Okay, I think it will still work. But let's see. So the directory for okay. Zoom in. So this is my directory. This is the Kafka server node where I'm trying to write to the URL that is specified. So if I were to look at the logs, there should be something for meetup. So there is a meetup directory here. So we have something going on here. And I can tail this to see if the data is actually written because it actually writes to log as well in Kafka server of what events it's getting. So we see a chunk of it in the tail towards the end, the things that have been actually the events that were published to Kafka. This is something that has been read from Wikipedia of one of the topics that we specified. So you can see that it is getting published to Kafka and it shows up on the Kafka server. So this is the Kafka server's view, and this is the cluster view on which I just ran things. Let's see what happened to our cluster creation. So this is a cluster creation. It came back to the home screen, so that means a new cluster should have been created. Yeah, we have the cluster 5. We can look at a Zookeeper view again of how it looks like. So this is the controller. So the leader node is specified here. This is the IP of that guy. This is the different kind of config. This is the cluster config. Then participants of these two nodes have joined as the worker because we selected at least 2 minimum workers. So this way you can create new clusters here. You can browse through and create jobs and execute all the jobs on that. This is still very much under work, but it would be available soon for early access. So you can sign up for that. Going back to the presentation. So the next steps are open up more sources and syncs on the UI so that you, like you just selected Wikipedia, now you can select any kind of source and you can write to any kind of syncs. Adding graphs, Graphite and Grafana. We already have support for Graphite, so we just want to boot it up with the instance and make it available to you. Add more cluster types, Azure, Google Cloud, launch on all of those other than AWS if you want to run there. Support for continuous execution and opening it up to public. You can register for it at Gobblin.io and show your interest. So that was it mostly. Any questions?